Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're continuing with the one thing. Moving on to Chapter 7. Willpower is always on will call. All encompassing this section of the book where we talk about the lies to success. Last week, we talked about discipline and how there's this lie that you have to be disciplined, not only in the task at hand, but in everything surrounding your life. And what Gary Keller had posed is that what it takes, success takes selected discipline in your one thing, and it doesn't necessarily need to be accomplished in other areas of your life. And in fact, when you do apply selected discipline, it has this sort of halo effect that ends up bleeding into other areas of your life, but it doesn't take that sort of focus to apply it in all those other areas. It just happens as an externality. They used an example of Michael Phelps, who was, maybe you guys have heard of the controversies. I remember he had that picture of him like smoking weed in a college dorm room. It's like, yeah, he's having fun. He's the greatest swimmer we've ever known, but he still is a human being, and he doesn't have that same discipline for swimming in like everything in his life. And I don't know of too many people that do. After reading that chapter, I understood what Gary was trying to say as far as discipline. And something that I had never thought about, because I always thought, hey, I got to be disciplined and regimented and stay the course in every aspect of my life, but you're just going to end up getting fatigued and worn out from that. And that kind of leads into what we're going to talk about today with willpower. In applying that same principle is kind of going to apply to willpower. Gary has the saying, as the chapter title is called, willpower is always on will call. It's not always going to be there. So let's just start. I'm going to go to the first slide. So why would you ever do something the hard way? This is the first thing that Gary asks at the beginning of the chapter. And he says it's kind of like how people just always want to do something with one hand tied behind their back. I'm kind of like this, where I'm like, hey, I don't really care that something's hard. I'm just going to go ram straight into it until we just get over the wall, instead of just waiting for the door to open or going around the wall or something like that. And Gary talks about this phrase that's been used for a long time, where there's a will, there's a way. And he says how this phrase has been misleading people ever since it was uttered, the initial uttering of this phrase. And he writes, widely regarded as the singular source of personal strength, it gets misinterpreted as a cleverly phrased one-dimensional prescription for success. But for will to have its most powerful way, there's more to it than that. Construe willpower as just a call for character, and you miss the other important thing about it, which is timing. Timing is the critical piece of this. So willpower, I looked up in Merriam-Webster online, and it's the ability to control one's own actions, emotions, or urges. But Gary writes that willpower is sometimes not there when you need it. And he uses the analogy throughout the chapter of a battery. Like, you have battery life. It's in the green, you got full power, and then as the day goes on, the battery wanes, and it gets into the red, and then you got to recharge it. That's kind of how he sees willpower. Willpower takes on this life of its own, and it's not just sitting around waiting for you to summon it. Sometimes it's not even sitting around because it's not there, because you've used all of it up, right? So there was this experiment that they did, Walter Mischel, in the late 1960s and 70s at Stanford University. It's interesting. They're quoting a lot from Stanford. Have you guys noticed in the book? A lot of research from Stanford. Obviously, it's a great school. I always think about Andrew Luck when I think about Stanford. But they did this study with 500 children. They called it the Marshmallow Test. And they took these kids, I forget what age they were. They just said they were kids, children. And they were offered one of three treats. So a pretzel, cookie, or a marshmallow. And they were offered the treats, or the study administrator would offer them two treats if they could wait 15 minutes while they go out and do something and come back. If they could wait the 15 minutes, they'll get two treats. And on average, kids held out less than 3 minutes. And actually, only 3 in 10 kids delayed their gratification successfully for the 15 minutes to get the two treats. So it's very, very difficult. Their willpower starts to wane a little bit. Willpower was in short supply, as Gary writes. And then they actually inferred some additional things from the study in how the kids who were able to delay their gratification actually fared better and had more success later in life. So they said starting in 1981, Mitchell began systematically tracking down the original subjects, requested their manuscripts, followed them along their life over the next 30 plus years. High delayers fared better on SAT test scores, higher feelings of self-worth, better stress management. On the other hand, low delayers, the people who couldn't wait the 15 minutes, 30% more likely to be overweight, suffered higher rates of drug addiction. So willpower is so important that using it effectively should be a high priority. When you have your will, Gary says, you get your way. So we know this. Okay, so now that we've got this study, high delayers fared better, more successful in life. How do you harness this willpower? And I think the key to harnessing it is realizing that it's what Gary says here, it's a renewable energy with a limited battery life. And you have to recognize that it's not an endless supply, so it comes down to a timing issue. You have to time your willpower. And again, another study that they cite is Baba Shiv's research. Sorry, I was trying to find the page for a second. Okay, again, Stanford University. Baba Shiv took 165 undergraduate students and put them into two groups. One group would memorize a 2-digit numbers, and another group would memorize 7-digit numbers. Right, so I'm guessing they would just give them like a list of 2-digit numbers. And then the other group, a list of 7-digit numbers. You have to like kind of spit them back out. And then the groups were offered either a snack of a cake or a bowl of fruit. So a unhealthy option or a very healthy option. Students who were asked to memorize the 7-digit sequence were twice as likely to choose cake as the bowl of fruit. So it's very interesting. What does this really tell us? And what this kind of tells us is the more we use our mind, the less minding power we have, says Gary. So the willpower that we use to memorize that 7-digit sequence, because it's going to take a lot of more mental capacity to memorize those 7-digit sequences than, you're talking about numbers in the 1 million, greater than 1 million, or a 2-digit number, 55. All right, it doesn't take as much. That mental capacity is going to drain your willpower, and then later on, you're going to make those not so great choices, like choosing cake or partaking in what have you, being on your phone. I know that's always my issue. Putzing around on social media, calling around people, wasting time, etc., because you have that lesser mental capacity. Moving on, food for thought. The brain is 1/50th of our mass but consumes 1/5 of our calories. So it's interesting. This is kind of tied to what we were just talking about in the last slide. How this small portion of our body is consuming a ton of the calories, not a ton, but a significant portion of the calories, and it's consuming a significant portion of our energy. And Gary says it's kind of like a Hummer. It's not very fuel efficient. Powerful, but not very fuel efficient. It's not a Ford Focus. They don't even make those. What's a fuel efficient car now? Some sort of Toyota, And Gary introduces this last in, first out principle, this last in, first out theory, that the most recent parts of the brain to develop are the first to suffer from willpower. And the older, more concrete, more developed areas of the brain don't really suffer from the willpower. So the lizard brain areas, like the hindbrain areas, don't suffer. The stuff that regulates breathing, that's just autonomic. That's your autonomic nervous system. That's pretty much always going to be there. You're still going to breathe. Even if your willpower just tanks, you're still going to be able to breathe, right? But the most recent parts of your brain to develop, the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making, the extrapolation, abstract thinking portions, those are going to suffer the most from lack of willpower. So another study, Journal of Personality and Social Psychology did this study. They actually detailed 9 separate studies. 2 of them that Gary highlights. There was one in which researchers assigned tasks that did or did not involve willpower and measured blood sugar levels before and after each task. Participants who exercised willpower showed a marked drop in levels of glucose in the bloodstream. So again, the ones that executed willpower are depleting their energy sources, drop in blood sugar. There was another study after completing, let me just read it here. Subsequent studies showed the impact on performance when 2 groups completed one willpower-related task and then did another. So they had this other study where they had to do successive willpower tasks. And after completing each willpower task, they were offered a sugary drink. Between tasks, one group was given a glass of Kool-Aid lemonade sweetened with real sugar, and the other was given a placebo lemonade sweetened with Splenda. So not real sugar. 0 calories. And they probably didn't know it. They probably were told, hey, we're giving you lemonade. But they didn't know that it was 0 sugar lemonade. So essentially, they're just drinking water. It's a placebo. What they found is that Splenda group had roughly twice as many errors on each subsequent test of willpower as the sugar group. So the sugar group's not having this drop or this increase in the errors from task to task because they're getting that supply of energy. But the other group is not getting that supply of energy. They're not getting replenished of calories at that rate. Although, yes, you could argue that drinking something sweet could stimulate gluconeogenesis. I've heard this before. This is kind of getting in the weeds, but anyway, they're not getting that sustained form of energy to power them through task to task, so they're making errors on the next task. And what Gary says is willpower does not just bounce back like that. You have less power available from task to task if you don't replenish yourself, you don't fuel your achievement or give your body enough time to rest and recharge. So another study, this one I found very fascinating. And the theme of this section was when your willpower is low, we go to our default setting. So there was this study, Jonathan Leora, again, a guy from Stanford, Leora, Avnam Peso, Shai Danziger. They called it the Israeli Parole System Study, and they took over 1,000 parole board hearings. that were assigned to 8 judges. So 8 judges for all like 1,000 hearings. That's a lot of hearings. And they have to go to these hearings, or these hearings are assigned to them, and they have to come up with a decision in a short amount of time to get to the next hearing, to get to the next hearing, etc. And they have breaks throughout the day and stuff, and they end at a certain time, right? So what they found, parolees' chances of being released peaked at 65% in the mornings and after a break. But towards the end of a period, they fall to near 0%. So what is this saying? This is saying that earlier in the day, when you're bright and bushy-tailed, your attention's high, your willpower's probably high, the judges are actually hearing the cases and executing judgments that are in favor of the parolees. But when it's towards the end of the day, when the willpower has been drained, the judges are defaulting to a no and choosing to keep the parolees behind bars or whatever, in jail, whatever have you. So when their willpower wanes, they default to an easy choice. They don't have to think about it. They're just defaulting to it because they don't have the willpower to really think and make a rash decision here, or make a decision based on the evidence in front of them. So Gary asks, what are your default choices? And I put down here, when I get tired and mentally drained, I'm in my phone. I'm scrolling mindlessly through my phone. It's not a good thing, in my opinion. So Gary says you got to give your willpower the time of day. And what we don't realize is we lose our willpower as the day goes on. And again, it's like a battery. We mentioned this earlier. So he suggests it's not that you need to have willpower all the time, every time. It's like discipline. You don't have to have discipline in all the time, every time, in every single aspect of your life. But do recognize when you have the most willpower, when it's at its highest level, and the most important thing in your life, your one thing, doing that one thing when your willpower is at its highest level. And recognize what depletes willpower, like filtering distractions, resisting temptation. We've seen that with some of the studies we've mentioned in this chapter. Restraining aggression, taking tests, being attentive in meetings. You think you got like 10 meetings in a day, you're going to be attentive at all of them? No, you'll probably be the most attentive, focused at the earlier meetings rather than the later meetings, most likely. So as he says in that last bullet point, doing your most important work early when your willpower is not drawn down. That's the biggest takeaway, I think, from this chapter, is doing your most important work when your willpower is at its highest. So to summarize the big ideas, don't spread your willpower too thin. You have a limited supply of willpower, so decide what matters and reserve your willpower for it. Monitor your fuel gauge. Full-strength willpower requires a full tank. Never let what matters most be compromised simply because your brain was underfueled. Eat right and regularly. Something that I discovered. I used to intermittent fast, and I would definitely in the middle of the day get very tired, and my work and willpower would suffer. Now I eat slightly smaller meals, but I'll get like 3 meals in the day. I'll actually eat a breakfast when I get up now. I'll eat midday, and then I'll eat, in the afternoon, a dinner. And I think it's helped. It's been to my benefit. Lastly, time your tasks. Do what matters most first each day when your willpower is strongest. Maximum strength willpower means maximum success. And guys, that's going to do it for Chapter 7. Willpower is always on Will Call. Thank you so much for tuning in and making it this far. Next week, we're going to talk about Chapter 8, From the One Thing, A Balanced Life. Very interesting. Another lie that they tell us. Check out the blog. Guys, I did a blog post on my one thing, my journey through a one thing in my life. And tune in next time for Chapter 8. Guys, thank you so much for listening this far again. If you have any questions, comments, leave them down below. But my name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.